Hello, and welcome to the complete publication history of Spider-Man presented by the Doombots Marvel Podcast, also known as Where Should I Start Reading? We're going to walk you through a summary of Spidey's entire publication history, spoilers included, so you can make that decision for yourself, and we'll also point out some suggestions along the way. We'll be using Marvel Unlimited, unsponsored, and we'll be explaining things with its terminology rather than collections or trades. Unfortunately, Marvel Unlimited search function sucks and will give you result after result of absolutely every comic Spider-Man's ever been in. Also, every time a title starts over with a new issue number 1, that's a separate entry with the same title in Marvel Unlimited, differentiated only by year and the cover image. I find that searching by the starting year, filtering by series, and then sorting alphabetically is the fastest way to find something specific, but I also enjoy filtering by series and browsing chronologically to discover new titles that I didn't already know about. The number listed beside the year is the number of issues that have been uploaded to Marvel Unlimited, which usually, but not always, is the total number of issues from that series. If there's only one issue uploaded, that's a one-shot, and we're pretty much going to ignore those for this video because you don't need to know about them. Generally, where you want to start reading is when a new writer starts writing a monthly title, especially if that writer sticks around for a decent chunk of issues that all go together, called a run. I also want to mention 2 tools that I think are particularly helpful if you're just getting started in comics. The first is the website mycomicshop.com. They've got pretty much every comic ever for sale, and I use their search function to find information like dates and creative teams, or sometimes just to browse cover images. The second tool is YouTube, and specifically our podcast, the Doombots Marvel Podcast. Getting overarching summaries is a great way to start building the Marvel story in your head. It creates a mental context so that you aren't actually starting from zero when you read. And the last thing I want to mention before we actually start is a recommended mindset behind reading Marvel Comics. When asked what makes a good starting point, Douglas Wolk, author of All the Marvels, said, "Start anywhere, just start." You'll never read every Marvel comic the way that he did for his book, so you'll never have the whole story. But you don't need that much context to enjoy most stories. And when you do find something you want to know more about, filling in those gaps by reading more is part of the fun of the Marvel Comics experience. Okay, all that said, our first suggestion of where you might begin is in fact the actual beginning. Start at the beginning. Spider-Man's first appearance was in 1962 in the 15th issue of an anthology book called Amazing Fantasy by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. If you want to start at the very beginning, you should start there. Then move over to the comic titled Amazing Spider-Man. You want the one from 1963 through 1998 that has 441 issues uploaded. Starting at the very beginning can be a great way to build up a history of Spider-Man in your mind, even if you don't keep reading every single issue. I definitely suggest everyone at least read Amazing Fantasy 15 just to get a feel for what comic books were like in the 60s. However, not everyone is going to enjoy the style of 1960s comics, so you may want to jump around to important issues. One thing I love about Marvel Unlimited, unsponsored, is that you don't have to read consecutively. You can jump around all you want. So if you're interested in reading only the most important Spider-Man stories of all time, we'll make note of those as we go through this video. Usually important means a first appearance or a death, and a number of characters' first appearances will be here in these early issues of Amazing Spider-Man, including Issue 1, J. Jonah Jameson, Issue 2, The Vulture, Issue 3, Doc Ock, Number 4, Sandman. Number 6, The Lizard. Number 9, Electro. 13, Mysterio. 14, Green Goblin. 15, Kraven the Hunter. 31, Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn. And 42, Mary Jane. Issue 33 is the climax of Steve Ditko's run and includes probably the most iconic Spider-Man moment of all time. Issue 39 is John Romita Sr.'s first issue and a major turning point in his ongoing battle against Green Goblin. I won't spoil it, but the cover already does. Issue 50 is probably the most famous Spider-Man cover and is also Kingpin's first appearance. Issue 51 is Robbie Robertson's first appearance. He's the Daily Bugle editor that's actually nice to Peter. Issue 90 is the death of Captain Stacy, spoiler alert. Issues 96 through 98 are historically noteworthy as they confront the issue of drug abuse and were thus published without the approval of the Comics Code Authority. Stan Lee's last issue of Amazing Spider-Man was number 100. Roy Thomas starts writing issue 101 with the first appearance of Morbius, but the next creator to have an extensive run on Spider-Man is Jerry Conway. Conway starts on issue 111, and his run includes such powerhouses as Issue 121, The Death of Gwen Stacy, spoiler alert. Issue 129, The First Appearance of Punisher. 131, Doc Ock marries Aunt May, not a dream! And 149, The First Time Peter Gets Cloned, which will go on to be a recurring trope in his life. 20 years from now, this clone will come back as a character named Ben Reilly the Scarlet Spider. Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway are also part of the old tradition that every editor-in-chief wrote Spider-Man. Len Wein started with issue 151 in 1975, Marv Wolfman took over at issue 182 in 1978, Jim Shooter plotted issue 208, and then Tom DeFalco's run started on issue 251, which was 3 years before he became editor-in-chief. Anyway, that's just some random trivia. Some noteworthy issues from this era include number 160, Introducing the Spider-Mobile. 183, The Villain You Never Knew You Needed in Your Life, Big Wheel. 194, The First Appearance of Black Cat. 210, The First Appearance of Madam Web. The next person who is remembered as writing for an era is Roger Stern. Roger Stern starts in 1982 on issue 224, and he is most well known for writing the Hobgoblin saga that begins with issue 238. Issue 248 is called The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, and is considered by many to be the single best Spider-Man issue of all time. Stern's run also crosses over into a comic book called Spectacular Spider-Man, so let's start complicating things by navigating the confusion of having multiple Spider-Man titles. In 1972, Marvel launched Marvel Team-Up, and on Unlimited, you're looking for the one with 116 issues that ran through 1985. It's basically a Spider-Man title that sees him team up with a different hero in each issue, and it's a great way to read Spider-Man while also being introduced to the wider Marvel universe. It's still an old comic, though, and it reads like an old comic, so if you're new to comics in general, I don't recommend starting here. The official second Spider-Man book starts in 1976 and ended in 1998. It's sometimes called Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and sometimes it's just called Spectacular Spider-Man. Unlimited has it listed under both names, which is needlessly complicated. They currently have it listed with 156 issues, but that number may be bigger by the time you're watching this, as there are actually 263 issues in total. The first chunk of issues are written by Bill Mantlo. Roger Stern takes over in 1980, starting with issue 45. So if you're enjoying Stern's run on Amazing, it's safe to say you'll also enjoy his Spectacular. The Sin Eater Saga, aka The Death of Jean DeWolf, spoiler alert, happens in Spectacular 107 through 110. Then in 1985, Spider-Man gets a third title called Web of Spider-Man that ran until 1995. It's currently listed with 98 issues, but that might also go up as it has a total of 129. Its first issue is part of the Black Costume Saga, aka the introduction of the symbiote who will one day become Venom. If you want to follow that story, you have to jump around to Secret Wars 1984-1985, issue number 8, which says where does it come from. Amazing issue 252 is its actual first appearance, and Amazing 258 is when Peter discovers it's alive. Spoiler alert. Continuing through this era, Web of Spider-Man 36 is the first appearance of Tombstone, and Amazing Spider-Man 265 is the first appearance of Silver Sable. Then in 1987, Kraven's Last Hunt by J.M. DeMatteis is considered by many to be the best Spider-Man story of all time. I recommend it because it is considered the best, not because I agree that it's the best. It has a very dark tone and deals with a heavy subject matter, so be ready for that. It also requires jumping back and forth between 3 different Spider-Man titles, but Marvel Unlimited has a reading guide that will help put them in order for you. David Michelini's run starts on Amazing Spider-Man issue 290, and he writes it throughout most of the 90s. Peter and MJ's wedding happens around here in Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 21, and I promised we would ignore one-shots though, so I'm only mentioning it to mention that I'm omitting it. All of this now brings us to the next big artist to define a run on Spider-Man. Todd McFarlane and Adjectiveless Spider-Man. Now the 4th simultaneous Spider-Man book. This one is just called Spider-Man. Since it's neither amazing, spectacular, or webby, it's often referred to as adjectiveless. It runs from 1990 through 98 and currently has 69 issues uploaded, but 98 exist. This is a gritty 90s take on Spider-Man, written and drawn by Spawn creator Todd McFarlane. I'm not a huge fan of McFarlane's writing, but there's certainly a reason why he's such an influential artist. You can also follow Todd's art throughout a lot of Michelini's run. Todd starts on Amazing issue 298. If you're jumping around, I suggest Amazing number 300, the first appearance of Venom, Amazing 361, the first appearance of Carnage, then jump back over to Spectacular 200 for the death of Harry Osborn, spoiler alert. And this takes us right up to where a lot of us started reading Spidey in 1993. Maximum Carnage! This 14-issue crossover pits Spidey against Carnage, Shriek, Doppelganger, Demogoblin, and Carrion. To win, he has to team up with Venom. That's what got me excited about this story. He also teams up with Deathlock, Iron Fist, Firestar, Cloak, Dagger, and Captain America. As soon as I discovered eBay, the first thing I did was collect the issues of Maximum Carnage that I had missed as a kid. You won't have to worry about missing issues, though, because Unlimited once again has a reading guide for you. The story is very 90s, so it's a great single story you can read to get an idea of what comics were like back then. However, it is the only thing I recommend reading from this era because the 90s got caught up in the confusion of The Clone Saga. Even with Marvel Unlimited's guide, following this infamous storyline that dominated the 90s is exceedingly difficult as it jumps back and forth between all 4 Spider-Man titles, which is just the beginning of the confusion. There are also one-shots, miniseries, and some of the titles even changed their names. This is one of those instances where I genuinely suggest listening to our podcast rather than trying to read the issues for yourself. We talked about it over 2 episodes, 115 and 116. The Death of Aunt May, spoiler alert, in issue 400 is a standalone story worth reading from this time. You may also want to read Web of Spider-Man 118, which is the first time Spider-Man's clone Ben Reilly becomes the hero Scarlet Spider. A simpler book from 1995 that avoided the Clone Saga and still gets a lot of praise is Untold Tales of Spider-Man by Kurt Busiek. Remember how Spider-Man's first appearance was in an anthology comic called Amazing Fantasy 15? Well, in 1995, they published issues 16, 17, and 18 of that series, looking at what happened between Amazing 15 and Amazing Spider-Man number 1. And those issues sold very well and are still worth reading, so an entire series was launched, i.e. The Untold Tales of Spider-Man, which ran for 25 issues. Now, these comics are steeped in lore. They literally take place between certain pages of the earlier issues. You can read them all by themselves, but the series as a whole is not a great place to start your Spider-Man journey. Okay, at the end of 1998, once the Clone Saga was finally over, Marvel canceled all of its Spider-Man comics. Volume 2. A soft reboot is when a title is published with a new issue number 1. Marvel does this a lot because anything labeled issue 1 sells better than any other number. It's considered a soft reboot because it's still in continuity, and what's called the legacy numbering continues. So the 442nd issue of Amazing Spider-Man was actually called Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, Issue 1. A new issue 1 will also usually involve bringing in a new creative team in an attempt to breathe new life into the story. It doesn't ignore what's come before, but it is designed, or at least intended, as a jumping on point for new readers. So this is what they did for Spider-Man in 1999 when all but 2 of his titles were canceled, leaving Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, which is 1999 through 2013, with 267 issues uploaded, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man, 1999 through 2003, with 57 issues uploaded. Both of these titles were written by Howard Mackie. This is an often forgotten run on Spider-Man because it gets overshadowed by what came before and after it. I'm not going to recommend it as a starting point simply because I feel like there are other better starting points, but these stories were designed to be accessible to new readers or old readers that were not familiar with the shenanigans of the Clone Saga. In 2001, after Mackie's run, we're going to enter what I consider the modern age of comics with J. Michael Straczynski. Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5, took over Amazing Spider-Man in the 30th issue of the new volume, or Legacy issue 471. I consider this the modern era of comics because the type of storytelling that Straczynski used is still utilized today. It's called decompressed, or writing for the trade. Basically, what they used to shove into a single issue, they'll now spread out across 5 or 6 to give the story room to breathe. This means fewer words per panel and fewer panels per page, which completely changes the reading pace. Straczynski's run is a great place to jump in. It focuses on the mythical side of Spider-Man asking, what if it wasn't an accident that he got his powers? What if the spider chose Peter? Some important issues include 30, the first appearance of Morlun; 36, Spider-Man deals with the aftermath of 9/11; 38, Aunt May discovers his identity. Spoiler alert, she's alive again. After issue 58, the legacy numbering restored to issue 500. So in 509, you get Sins Past, which is considered by many to be the worst Spider-Man story ever. So that definitely makes it noteworthy. Whether or not that makes it worth reading is up to you. Issue 533, Spider-Man reveals his identity to the world as part of the famous Civil War crossover. Issue 545, One More Day, is another story that is often considered the worst of all time, in which Mephisto magically erases MJ and Peter's marriage. We'll come back to One More Day after a quick detour through Spectacular Friendly Team-Up of Unlimited Avenging Knights, a new flood of Spidey titles. The early 2000s saw another increase in the number of simultaneous Spider-Man comics. Many of them were designed to capture new readers brought in by the Sam Raimi films. I actually think any of these make a good starting place if one of their premises piques your interest. Spectacular Spider-Man 2003 through 2005, with 27 issues uploaded, has art by my favorite Spider-Man artist of all time, Humberto Ramos. Marvel Team-Up 2004 through 2006, with 25 issues uploaded, is by Walking Dead and Invincible creator Robert Kirkman. It is nothing like either of those titles, but it sees Spidey team up with characters from all over the Marvel U. Marvel Knight Spider-Man 2004 through 2006, with 22 issues uploaded, is a slightly edgier, grittier version of Spider-Man written by Mark Millar. And Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man 2005 through 2007, with 24 issues uploaded, is by Peter David. Skip the first 3 issues, though, because they're part of a crossover called The Other that requires you to once again jump back and forth between multiple different Spider-Man titles. Friendly Neighborhood also changes its name to Sensational after issue number 22. That's the sort of seemingly random choice that causes all of this confusion in the first place. In the 40th issue of this volume of Sensational Spider-Man, Peter meets the one above all, Marvel's Uber God. It's another noteworthy issue because that does not happen every day. I'm also going to suggest 2011's Avenging Spider-Man, which has 22 issues uploaded, mostly by Zeb Wells, since we're talking about Spidey's alternate titles that make good starting points. This is about his time as an Avenger, and if that's your jam, you can also read New Avengers by Brian Michael Bendis, 2004 through 2010, with 64 issues. It isn't strictly speaking a Spider-Man title, but it is another great way to see the larger MCU, that's Marvel Comics universe. Spider-Man was also an Avenger throughout Mark Waid's run on Avengers 2016 through 2018 with 36 issues. And if you are really interested in exploring other titles featuring Spider-Man, be sure to check out FF by Jonathan Hickman 2011 through 2012 with 23 issues, where in Johnny Storm's absence, Spider-Man officially joins the Fantastic Four. Okay, Web Spinners, Tales of Spider-Man, followed by Spider-Man's Tangled Web, followed by Spider-Man Unlimited, are all anthology series from this approximate time period, usually featuring characters around Spider-Man rather than the wall crawler himself. I don't tend to recommend anthologies as places to start, as they don't feature important stories or mainstream talent, and the shorter stories often feel unsatisfying, at least to me. That said, some people love shorter stories, so by all means, dive into these. Now, to further complicate things, let's discuss non-canon comics. There are a lot of great Spider-Man comics that didn't happen to the one true Spider-Man. Like his cartoons or his video games, these stories happen to a different version of Spider-Man. None of these comics are on my list of places you should start reading Spider-Man because the real Spider-Man isn't technically in any of these comics. That being said, to understand his publication history, it is important to discuss Ultimate Spider-Man. Ultimate Spider-Man 2000 through 2009 with 133 issues was a hard reboot of the character, looking at what a modern version of Spider-Man might be like. The entire Ultimate Universe was an alternate take on the Marvel Universe. Much of it was great, much of it was terrible. The important thing to keep in mind is that no comic with the ultimate adjective takes place in what's called the 616 or 616 or the world of Marvel Comics. It is a fully different universe using reimagined versions of the same characters. That includes Jonathan Hickman's current version of Ultimate Spider-Man, 2024 through the present, which currently has 48 issues listed, but it actually only has 24 issues because half of the issues are just the regular issues reformatted for digital scrolling. It follows an older Peter who didn't get his powers until he was an adult. It's good, and therefore it gets a shout out here despite not being on this list. Marvel Age Spider-Man, Marvel Adventures Spider-Man, Spidey, and Marvel Action Spider-Man are 4 other series that aren't canon from 2004, 2005, 2015, and 2018 respectively. They were all designed for younger readers and might be comics you want to point your kids towards. Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane, 2005 through 2007 with 20 issues, is part of the Marvel Age line, and it is an amazing teen romance book that I love, and so I want to give a shout out to it. Spider-Man 2099 is another famous title that isn't canon, taking place in the alternate future of, you guessed it, the year 2099. It had multiple major runs in 1992 and 2014, and has even crossed over with the regular Marvel Universe a few times. Many people are familiar with Spider-Man 2099 or Miguel O'Hara because Oscar Isaac played him in Into the Spider-Verse. A few other noteworthy non-canon Spider-Man comics include Adventures of Spider-Man 1996, which is based on the cartoon. Chapter 1 is a 1999 retelling of his origin by All-Star creator John Byrne. Renew Your Vows from 2016 follows an older Spider-Man and his Spider family. The 2016 through 2018 volume of Adjectiveless Spider-Man with 28 issues uploaded is in fact canon, but it's about Miles Morales, not Peter Parker. I'll do a different video about Miles' publication history later. In 2019, J.J. Abrams wrote a 5-issue miniseries just called Spider-Man that actually follows Peter's son discovering that his dad used to be Spider-Man. Also in 2019, there was a 6-issue miniseries called Spider-Man Life Story that looks at the life of a Peter Parker from the 1960s who ages in real time, so he's in his 70s now. Uncanny Spider-Man from 2023 actually is canon, but it's about the X-Man Nightcrawler, not Peter Parker. Okay, detour over. Let's move back to Amazing Spider-Man 4... Brand New Day. In 2008, after the infamous One More Day story magically erased MJ and Peter's marriage, there was a major publication shift called Brand New Day. Starting with Amazing Spider-Man issue 546, all of Spider-Man's secondary titles were canceled in order to bring the focus back to the Amazing Spider-Man, which was now being published 3 times a month. To keep up with that pace, there was a rotating brain trust of writers and artists who would take turns writing different story arcs. It was strongly designed as a jumping on point for new readers, and I think that if I had to suggest one and only one place to start reading Spider-Man comics, it would be this. Mark Guggenheim, Zeb Wells, Dan Slott, and Bob Gale, who wrote Back to the Future, were the core writers, but there were also stories by Joe Kelly, Fred Van Lente, who's a personal favorite of mine, and legendary comics scribe Mark Waid. As controversial as erasing MJ and Peter's marriage was, and believe me, it is still considered controversial, I think that this era captures Peter's core struggle very well, and that includes his complicated dating life. Plus, J. Jonah Jameson becomes mayor of New York. There's a lot going on here, and I am a fan of all of it. As we get closer and closer to the modern day, it gets harder and harder to know what issues are special or worth jumping around to. Most new villains like Menace and Overdrive don't tend to have the staying power of their classic counterparts. That being said, Mr. Negative and Anti-Venom have certainly integrated themselves pretty thoroughly into the Spider-Man zeitgeist. Their first appearances are in issues 546 and 569. Then in 2010, once Brand New Day had run its course, the reins of Spider-Man were handed to Dan Slott. Dan Slott wrote Spider-Man for 10 years. That's more than any other single writer, including Stan Lee. His run starts here with a very interesting premise called Big Time. It asks, what if life didn't suck for Peter Parker? What if Peter Parker got a stable job as a scientist? How would that affect his life as Spider-Man? Even if you're just jumping around, I think Big Time is worth being called a special issue because of how much it changed Peter Parker's status quo for the better part of a decade. It starts in Amazing Spider-Man 648. Then issue 666 is the beginning of Spider Island, where everyone in Manhattan gets spider powers. Slott's run is great, especially if you like a more positive outlook in your superhero comics. Plus, we are once again getting art by my personal favorite Spider-Man artist, Humberto Ramos. Also, this is the prelude to my personal favorite Spider-Man story, Superior Spider-Man. We're still in Dan Slott's run, but the comic Amazing Spider-Man has been replaced by Superior Spider-Man because Dr. Octopus is now in control of Peter's body. Yes, Dr. Octopus is the new Spider-Man. What does that mean? Well, read these issues. It's a nice original spin on a much more aggressive and, dare I say, diabolical Spider-Man. You want to find the volume with 34 issues that ran from 2013 to 2014. It might not be the best very first Spider-Man comics to read, but they are very good comics. There was also a 12-issue series from 2013 called Superior Spider-Man Team Up that's all about the larger Marvel Comics reaction to Spider-Man's sudden change in behavior. This definitely is not a good place to start reading Spider-Man, but it's a great companion piece to Superior. And speaking of Superior, while not technically about Spider-Man, Superior Foes of Spider-Man by Nick Spencer is another great series. It's a 17-issue series from 2013 that follows a gang of Spider-Man's C-list villains. I highly recommend it. Alright, those are all the Superior titles. Now we enter the Spider-Verse. As soon as Peter gets his body back, spoiler alert, Amazing Spider-Man resets with a new issue number 1. This volume is labeled 2014 through 2015 and has 28 issues uploaded. Still by Dan Slott, we're about to jump into the Spider-Verse crossover, which is probably the most famous Spider-Man story. It sees Spider-Mans and Womens from all over the multiverse teaming up to stop Morlun and the Inheritors from eating all the Spider people. It is nothing like the movie, but it is sprawling and it's epic, and it has spawned multiple sequels, and it introduces a bunch of new characters who are all Spider-Man in their own unique ways. Specifically, the first issue of this volume of Amazing Spider-Man introduces Cindy Moon, aka Silk, who was bitten by the same spider that bit Peter. Spider-Verse can be pretty hard to follow because of how many different mini-series the story stretches through, but Unlimited has a great guide for that, so if it piques your interest, don't let a little confusion stop you. Alright, speaking of confusion, in 2015, Marvel reset every single one of its comics with a new issue number 1 because of a major crossover called Secret Wars, which was actually the third Secret Wars, where Doctor Doom became God. So if you want to keep reading, you now have to find the volume labeled 2015 through 2018 with 51 issues. This is when Peter was running a global corporation called Parker Industries and dating none other than Hawkeye's ex-wife Mockingbird. It's pretty deeply entrenched in the status quo of the time, so I wouldn't actually recommend it as a starting point. Noteworthy stories include Dead No More / The Clone Conspiracy, which begins in issue 19. They reset the legacy numbering again with issue 789. Then Go Down Swinging in issue 798 introduces the Red Goblin, which is Norman Osborn in the Carnage symbiote. Issue 801 is Dan Slott's last issue, and it's my single favorite issue of Spider-Man. It makes me tear up every time, and it stands completely on its own. Nick Spencer. New writer, new issue number 1, new jumping on point. You're looking for the volume from 2018 through 2022 with 105 issues. Nick Spencer's run finds Peter Parker poor again, and his new roommate is none other than the C-list villain Boomerang. Hilarity ensues. There's also a new big bad named Kindred, who is a demon trying to get Peter to remember his greatest sin. The first issues are very strong, but Kindred turns out to be part of the most convoluted retcon in Spider-Man and possibly all of Marvel. I once again want to recommend our podcast here. Our 4th episode was about the beginning of Spencer's run, and the 80th episode is all about Kindred's many confusing twists and turns. After Spencer's run, issues 75 through 93 of this volume are called the Beyond Saga, where Peter's clone Ben Reilly becomes Spider-Man. Definitely don't start reading here, it will be very confusing. After Beyond comes another volume reset. Zeb Wells. Zeb Wells' run is listed with 72 issues as being from 2002 to the present, which is inaccurate because Zeb Wells' run is over. His was a controversial run. Peter's a little more of an outsider, a little more of a jerk. There's a 6-month mystery at the beginning of the run that doesn't get explored until issue 21. Honestly, if you are interested in Zeb Wells' run, I recommend reading issue 21 first, because the story behind the mystery is fantastic, but a lot of Peter's behavior feels wrong if you don't understand the why behind his current circumstances. Issue 17 has the first appearance of Wreck-Rap, a demon who thinks he's Spider-Man. Issue 26 is the death of Kamala Khan, aka Ms. Marvel. Spoiler alert. Do you want the fun of Zeb Wells' run without any of the confusion? Check out episodes 81 and 125 of our podcast. Is this whole video just an ad for our podcast? Kind of. We really like our podcast and we want to share it with more people. All right, then who is writing Amazing Spider-Man now as of July 2026? Joe Kelly. The current run is listed as 2025 through the present and has 23 issues. I suspect it will change again in September of 2026 when Amazing Spider-Man issue 1000 comes out. I don't think this volume is a great jumping on point. It's hard to say because there's no historical context to judge it with. It doesn't actually require a lot of knowledge of Peter's backstory because it removes him from his normal setting. He goes to space. It's Spider-Man in space. I personally love it because I love any time they take Spidey and do something new with him. There are some fun space characters who have first appearances here, but only the future will know if those characters actually matter. What about the other titles? Amazing Spider-Man has been the focal point of Spider-Man's story since Brand New Day back in 2008. Marvel makes a point of putting the important stuff there and random adventures in other titles. In the past 20-ish years, none of those other titles, like Spectacular, Web of, or Friendly Neighborhood, have had consistent or noteworthy runs. There have been short runs, there have been mini-series, there have been crossover events, there have been a lot of alternate universe spiders who got their own series like Spider-Man India, Spider-Noir, and Punk Spider-Man. But in terms of jumping on points for new readers, I would ignore all of that and focus on one of the runs from his main title, Amazing Spider-Man. That said, here are some other titles that also exist. Amazing Spider-Man Family was an 8-issue anthology from 2008, which was renamed Web of Spider-Man in 2009 for a 12-issue resurgence of that title. Marvel Knights Spider-Man had a 5-issue relaunch in 2013. Tom Taylor wrote a 14-issue run of Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man in 2019, wherein Aunt May gets cancer. Superior Spider-Man comes back for another 12-issue run by Christos Gage in 2019. The second longest running Spider-Man title since Brand New Day was Spider-Man Deadpool, 2016 through 2019 with 51 issues. Deadpool, in my experience, is a love him or hate him kind of guy, so I'll let everyone judge their own if this interests them. Dan Slott did a run on Adjectiveless Spider-Man for 11 issues in 2022. It's a continuation of the Spider-Verse story. In 2024, Greg Weisman, the creator of my favorite cartoon Gargoyles and showrunner of the 2008 Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon, did a 15-issue run called Spectacular Spider-Men, featuring an extended team-up between Pete and the other Spider-Man, Miles Morales. And if you want something super modern besides Joe Kelly's run, Mark Guggenheim just wrapped up a 10-issue series called Spider-Man and Wolverine. It's an action thriller where Spidey and Wolvie get caught up in some spy shenanigans. And just because it's right here, I do want to mention there was a Spider-Man vs. Wolverine one-shot in 1987 that features Spider-Man jumping over the Berlin Wall. I also want to make special note of Chip Zdarsky's run on Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man, 2017 through 2018, 23 issues. In issue 6, Peter reveals his secret identity to J. Jonah Jameson, spoiler alert, and it is my second favorite single issue of Spider-Man. Alright, this brings us to our final suggestion. Mini-series! Throughout the years, Spider-Man has been featured in nearly 100 one-shots and miniseries. I do not normally recommend starting with a miniseries because if you like Spider-Man, you're gonna want more than 5 or 6 issues to read through. Also, a large portion of miniseries are tie-ins to larger stories. Other miniseries can offer a variety of tones, which is nice when you want something different from Spider-Man, but isn't where I'd start. That being said, there are 3 miniseries that I think do make good starting points and that every Spider-Man fan should read. Spider-Man Blue from 2002 is a modern retelling of Peter and Gwen Stacy's romance, narrated by Peter. It is great, and it is on most of these Where Should I Start Reading Spider-Man lists for a reason. Spider-Man and the X-Men from 2014 features what is probably the most famous single panel from a Spider-Man comic, where the villain Sauron exclaims, "I don't want to cure cancer, I want to turn people into dinosaurs!" And Spider-Man Human Torch from 2005 by Dan Slott is hilarious, and it is criminally underrated, and therefore it gets the final suggestion. Okay, to end the video, I will also mention the Marvel Unlimited exclusive digital comic book, Astonishing Spider-Man. It uses the infinite scroll format popularized by places like Webtoons. I did not personally find the story as engaging as I wanted it to be, but this is definitely where Marvel wants you to start reading Spider-Man. Okay, leave a comment about where did you start reading Spider-Man and what other starting points do you recommend. Thank you so much for listening, and check out our podcast. Our podcast is great. You will love our podcast. That is a Doombot's promise.
I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs. I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs.
I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs. I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs. I want to turn people into dinosaurs.